Hello and welcome to another episode of Political Frenemies. I'm Chris Newton. I'm an academic and a former Tory advisor. Before I introduce this week's guest, I suppose I better say hello to my co-host, Lib Dem activist and former councillor, Mathew Hulbert. Hello, Mathew. How are you?
I'm very, very well. I don't know if it's the same way you are down south, Chris, but it's been very cold up here in the Midlands. It's like very cold. You really feel it in your bones. So, and very wet and very rainy and very dull and very grey. So it's kind of been difficult to have a smile on your face, really. But of course, seeing you, Chris, always puts a smile on my face.
Ah, thanks for that, and you likewise. Yeah, I mean, here it has been very cold, apart from today, where it's starting to get a little bit more milder, and hopefully over the next few weeks we'll get the first signs of spring. Because I know I say this every winter, but I'm absolutely fed up of the cold, and I can't wait for the spring. So bring that on. So we have a bit of sunshine and a bit of warmth. But anyway, this is not a weather podcast. I know certain people think it might be, because we always complain about the weather. But this is back to politics and introducing this week's guest, which is another new guest, and it is Managing Director of Forefront and former Deputy Head of the Number 10 Policy Unit and former Treasury Special Advisor to Rishi Sunak, James Nation. Hello, James. How are you?
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I am also fairly cold. What a miserable February. So let me just get my weather disclaimer out of the way. But aside from that, very well, thanks. Been a bit of a good respite, hasn't it, with recess this week, but plenty going on in the world for us to chew over.
Yeah, I mean, it's recess week. Parliament hasn't been sitting, and usually we take the week off. But a combination of the fact that Mathew had already booked a guest, and the fact that there's been so much going on this week that we keep going. We keep on going. Just before we get to the main business, you're a very interesting person. Our viewers will be interested in your background. So tell us about, especially your time in government, and what it's like to work in government, and the Number 10 Policy Unit especially.
Gosh, well, I hope to prove I'm interesting, but there we go. I suppose what would be some features about my career that people might find intriguing? Well, I guess it's worth saying I was both a civil servant and a political advisor. So I started my career working for the CBI for about 4 years. I remember getting the Eurostar to Brussels when we were still an EU member state, dealing with dossiers there early on. Then I joined the civil service. I joined the civil service in 2016. Just before the referendum, actually, and then obviously Cameron resigns, in comes Theresa May, and I was working on housing at the time, and that's when housing was, quote unquote, the number one issue in the country, according to the May administration. But that was really good fun, actually, to see what happens when Number 10 in the centre of government really focuses on working with the department on a key policy area of focus, is prepared to use its heft with other departments like the Treasury as well to get things done. Then really my career turned when I ended up in private office, which is basically you're a combination of a bag carrier for a minister, but you also are a civil servant who conducts business on the minister's behalf. You get to work with the politicians quite closely. And I got lucky because I worked for some great ministers. Firstly, Sajid Javid, and then James Brokenshire. And about the time James Brokenshire was Secretary of State, there was quite a smart, sharp, promising junior minister, a guy called Rishi Sunak. And I remember having some interactions with him in that job. But let's fast forward. Years later, I'm in the Treasury. I'm a civil servant in the Treasury. And there was just an opportunity that emerged to switch to be a special advisor, to go and work effectively as an advisor on domestic policy for the then Chancellor, which was Rishi. And this was quite a big moment for me because, as many of your listeners will know, once you kind of cross the Rubicon, you leave the civil service behind, right? It's not like I could try, but it's not like I could call, senior civil servants now and say, hey guys, I wasn't really a Tory. Can I have my job back? It's a big decision. And for me, though, it was obvious. When someone like Rishi Sunak at the time, in the throes of the pandemic, says, do you want to come and work for me? The guy's got a lot of promise. He switched on. The answer was definitely yes. And then I was with him all the way through. I'd quite like to work on a winning campaign one day. I always say that because obviously we lost to Liz Truss. There was the general election latterly. But I was with Rishi all the way through and the team all the way through, ending up in number 10 as well. And that obviously all ended in July 24. So look, many things we could reflect on. Lucky to have been in both the Treasury and number 10, very different buildings in many ways, but I think key to understand how they interrelate, how they work together if you want to get an appreciation for what works and what doesn't in government. But that was me, basically, and I was very, very fortunate to have been there all the way through. I remember, final thing I'll say, I remember being, in Lisbon. We'd lost the leadership race to Liz Truss. This was a few months on even. Kwasi Kwarteng had just delivered the mini budget, and I remember being there in Lisbon thinking, well, thank God I got my Euros a few days ago, and also, this isn't going to happen again, is it? Like, surely not. And then you fast forward, and all of a sudden, you find yourself in number 10, and you realise life has taken a funny turn, and gosh, what is going on with UK politics?
And I think for those of us who are kind of political obsessives, political geeks. I mean, there's a kind of mystery that surrounds, being in number 10 and actually working for the government. And obviously we've had Peter Cardwell on, and he's literally written the book on The Secret Life of Special Advisors, which is a great read. Peter's a great guy. Give us a sense of going to work every day. I mean, I appreciate that it must be like any other job in the end of you going to work, but also there must be that sense of, oh my goodness, especially in the beginning, that I'm working in number 10. I mean, tell us a bit about that.
Oh, that never... If you ever stop finding that cool, you need to leave, because it is an enormous pinch yourself moment, and I'm a history nerd, so walking around the building and being told, well, there's the desk that, or that was Wellington's desk, or sorry, or that was like Pitt's desk during the Napoleonic Wars, and you're just like, oh my God. So every day you have to pinch yourself going into that environment, but it is an environment like no other. I mean, I did just mention, Matthew, the comparison with the Treasury, and I think to understand the difference between those two buildings is quite illustrative. When you go into number 10 as one of the senior or closest advisors to the Prime Minister, effectively your day is dealing with about 30 micro decisions, difficult choices that have come up to you where you've got to decide, do I escalate this to the Prime Minister, or do I make a decision on his behalf, or do I push it back to the department? And you're sort of in reactive mode, because then in the morning you'll have that morning meeting with the PM. There'll be a story that's emerged overnight. You might be tasked by the Chief of Staff or someone else to go away and deal with it. So it can feel like quite a hectic, reactive day. And some days you come out and you think, what value did I add at all today? And I think that particularly is the case if you are someone who likes to feel that they've thought about an issue or gripped an issue properly or done a bit of strategic thinking. That is always very difficult, because really, as I say, there is just that kind of firefighting and filter element that you have to focus on. And look, the one thing I will say is maybe my experience is, sort of peculiar in the sense that it was the tail end of Tory rule, the last stint of the Conservatives in government, and Rishi's premiership was in many ways a reactive one, given what happened with the mini budget and the fallout. So maybe my experience was slightly atypical, but it's very different from a building like the Treasury, where you've got more staff, more civil servants, and you're sort of able to go away and work on particular analytical projects, particular tax policy or whatever else, and then choose when you surface around a budget. Number 10 is not like that. You are dealing with everyday events and big decisions, marginal calls all the time.
And just a final question from me to you on this. I mean, again, I'm just really interested in again, you talk about pinch yourself moments. I mean, kind of every time you're in a room with the person who is the Prime Minister, and that you can hopefully have some kind of I don't know if influence is the right word, but involvement. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, again, how is that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the way I'd answer it is, if I was on here saying I'm particularly proud of budget 2021 or whatever, I mean, yes, I am, but that was really a whole team effort.
Sure.
You know, like, and I mean, I'm talking about the officials there as well, the kind of institution in the Treasury. For me, the kind of best moments were where you'd come out and you'd feel like, you know, I added value today because I was the one who put my head round to the Prime Minister or the Chancellor and said, do you know what? I actually think the Treasury might be wrong on this and we should, you know, adopt this particular policy around, I don't know, for example, extending compensation for the full lifetime of thalidomide sufferers or something like that, right? Where you just thought that your particular sense that the official advice was maybe wrong or the official advice was right and you just wanted to amplify it, stick your neck out and say, I think we should do this, PM, and then once you knew his view, absolutely go into battle to make sure that you drive that through the system. Those are the best moments, Matthew. The hardest moments as a special advisor was when you don't necessarily know what your principal thinks, you know, in my case, the Chancellor or the PM, because the system can sniff that. And if you're an advisor and you give the wrong steer, or you don't necessarily know what, in my case, Rishi thinks, that's when the job could be quite lonely. But when you did know what he wanted, you knew what the right thing to do was, and also that you had Prime Ministerial or Chancellor buy-in, that's where you could see yourself adding value. And you could see it most on those more discrete examples. I think, you know, it would. What I'm saying is, if anyone tried to claim, I'm fully responsible for a budget, that's a massive enterprise. Everyone's involved. The ones that stick in the mind are maybe the mistakes, but also the achievements where you yourself can see, I added value on that one thing. I got it to the top of the pile, and I helped get the right steer.
And just one final question from me. Firstly, I totally relate in when you said about sort of working in these, you know, very historic buildings, and you have to pinch yourself. I didn't work in government till number 10, but I did have I worked in CCHQ, but I also had a hot desk in Parliament as well. I shared an office with the great Julian Lewis, and every morning I walked through, you know, a central lobby, and, you know, again, it's just like you can't stop being overawed by the Palace of Westminster.
Totally.
But in terms of your time, especially towards the end, I suppose a lot of our listeners will be asking is kind of your sort of recollections of the Sunak government period, and whether whether you felt that things could have been done differently, or was it the case that, you know, you just had the trust budget, you just had COVID, there wasn't that much that you could do, and therefore the priority was consolidation and trying to preserve as much as you could?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is hindsight is a lovely thing here, and often some of the examples that I'm going to give you where I kick myself a little bit, you can still go back and understand why the decision was what it was at the time. So my kind of abiding memory of that first period, Chris, was really, you know, you had to establish a good working relationship between Rishi and Jeremy Hunt, who didn't know each other that well, but obviously Jeremy was at the helm, had played a critical role in stabilising things with the post mini budget fallout, and there was a need to think about when we held an autumn statement, or what the kind of first fiscal intervention would be, and making sure that a new PM coming in wouldn't be too disruptive for that process. So early on, all of us were focused on having a one team, close knit dimension and dynamic, really, between Jeremy's advisors, who are still really good friends of mine, and ours as well, and, you know, really making sure that we were able to do some important things in that early autumn statement, which, you know, people forget now, but we found some money for schools, for instance, because there was still a need to ensure that public services were recovering following on from the pandemic, while also continuing to deal with the repair job from the pandemic, but also the mini budget fallout as well. So that was early on. I think, if there are things, to give you an example of something that I kicked myself for slightly, quite early on planning reform, we gave in to the Tory parliamentary party, so our MPs, put forward amendments to weaken housing targets. Quite a NIMBY package, I think, looking back. And the reason why we kind of sort of thought, okay, we'll accept or we'll try and do a deal here is it would have been a bad look if quite early on in Rishi's premiership we lost the vote or not been able to command majority support from the Conservative Parliamentary Party in the Commons in favour of one of our own bills. But I think looking back, what makes me uncomfortable about that is, well, one, it's surrendered a lot of ground to the Labour Party. It was a gift for them to say we're pro-growth. I mean, I wonder how that's working out now, but that's beside the point. And also, it was just the wrong thing for the country. It's one of those issues where, we need to build more houses. We need to have an effective stick as well as carrot in the planning system. So that's one that I kind of look back on. And then for the rest of it, we were able to do some proactive policy interventions that have stood the test of time. Not many people will have heard of them, but I could say to you now, some of the policies that we did to combat antisocial behaviour on fraud have been continued by the current government, did get good results. I'm particularly proud of legislation that we introduced to exonerate falsely convicted postmasters. I think that was absolutely the right thing to do, and we ran that through and passed the judiciary and others who are very hostile to that move. I think the economic record speaks for itself with the kind of inflation and growth environment that Rishi and Jeremy Hunt handed over. But yeah, undeniably, on issues like immigration, that was harder to square the circle, particularly when we look at illegal immigration and the small boats crossings. And towards the end, you were just seeing fragmentation of the Conservative Party. And when that starts to happen, when you can't really command or you lack effective power over your MPs, we're seeing this now, right, with Keir Starmer, and he has a majority. I often say to Labour advisors, I mean, I know it's hard, guys, but I'd have killed for your majority, right? But when you lose effective power in Westminster, you guys know this, your ability to get things done and to stop being so reactive, like I was describing earlier, is very difficult. So towards the end of the premiership, it did just start to feel like we just couldn't move. Every direction was fraught with risk. And in many ways, one thing the general election campaign did do, as hard as it was that it did enable you to prosecute more of an argument and an alternative with the Labour Party, to try and force the Labour Party into actually, some positions rather than just playing it safe. And of course, that didn't work in July 24, but boy, has it caused them some problems in government as well. So that's how with some specific examples, which I hope are helpful and not random, that's how I kind of see the arc of what we went through in number 10.
Yeah, thanks for that, and I think that was pretty balanced as well. And I think our viewers would enjoy that. So thanks very much for that. But we've got to move on with today's agenda, and as I said at the start, there's a really busy week, lots of dramatic stories. So first of all, we're going to cover Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and his arrest. Then we're going to look at Starmer's week, and there's a load of stories there which we'll get into. Then we'll talk about Reform's first shadow cabinet appointments and our reactions to that. So do stay tuned and let's get started. Now, first story is a massive story. It's dominated the news for the last couple of days. It is the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, formerly Prince Andrew. He's been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. Obviously, this is a live case, and we can't comment on the specific allegations or other allegations that have emerged in the media over the past months and years or so. So we're just going to have to keep this broad, but obviously the fact that a member of the royal family has been arrested, I mean, this will completely rock the monarchy. And what are your reactions, and what does this mean for the monarchy going forward? Is it in an absolute precarious case now, James?
So I don't think the monarchy is in a precarious state off the back of this. I certainly think, noting your caveats, which I think are right on the specific case, that nonetheless the revelations we do know about are as disgraceful as they are disgusting. And I think, it has been a relief to finally see the royal family deal with that. And I think we saw some breaking news. It looks like Parliament and the government may be taking some further action as well, which we might want to unpack briefly after this. But where I don't go is I don't go off the back of that to think that there is some systemic crisis at the heart of the monarchy. I remain a monarchist. The reason is I'm not quite convinced about the alternatives or the benefits of some, different system around an elected head of state or more politicians. I think obviously this is a very challenging situation for the king. I think what we need to see now is transparency and really coordination between all arms of the state with how they deal with this. I think I don't want to see flat-footedness, because what you see at times like this is sometimes the public speculation or the public clamour for further action can really dial up, and I think you are better to stay ahead of that. But yeah, I would just go back to where I started, which is the revelations that we do know about are as disgraceful as they are disgusting, and you've got to go back to thoughts being with the victims and everyone who went through hell as a result of, Epstein, his web, and all of those ordeals.
Yes, and on that breaking news, this is just breaking at the time of recording. The government, I'm just reading the headline, the government considers removing Andrew from the royal line of succession. Obviously, he's been stripped of his titles and everything, and this is kind of one of the last things remaining. Any reaction to that, Mathew, or the broader issue?
Well, I mean, so just to say that I was on my local BBC radio station, Radio Leicester, this morning, talking about this issue, and obviously it's difficult, and it's difficult for us because it is a live case and we just can't talk about it. We'd be in very serious trouble if we did. But I will say here, as I said this morning, that I think this is the greatest crisis that the monarchy has faced since the abdication some 90 years ago. Now, look, as you guys know, and as I think our audience probably know by now, I'm a Republican. I'm an anti-monarchist. I always have been. I, for many years, in fact, was on the board of Republic, the campaign for an elected head of state, and it's just something that I believe. I mean, I said on the radio this morning that it makes me smile that, when I was a parish councillor for a little parish council ward in Barwell, just down the road here in Leicestershire, and I got elected with my 200 some odd votes. That was 200 some odd more votes than half of Parliament, the House of Lords, and our head of state. And I just think that is literally an incredible a not credible position for a democracy in the 21st century. And I know that some people say, and I hear it that often that I'm so sick of hearing it, but I know that people say, oh, what would you rather, President Blair? And my answer to that, and in fact, I think you at one time, Chris, said, oh, President Angela Rayner. Well, my answer to that is yes, if that is the people, if that is who the people elect. That is the whole point. That is democracy. And in countries like Germany, in countries like the Republic of Ireland, who had a very dynamic presidential election last year, they managed to elect a kind of titular head of state. They don't have all the family hangers on that the Windsors do. They have a mandate and are able to, albeit that it's quite limited what they can say politically, but they can and do make speeches on the less contentious political issues, which again our monarch isn't supposed to do, although, of course, famously, as Prince of Wales, Charles told us his views on pretty much anything and everything. You can go back and look at what he thinks about things. Now he pretends he has no views. So again, I just think that in the 21st century, the idea that there's this family we were once told, obviously they can't really say this anymore, can they, even separate to the Andrew things, that there's some great kind of moral pillars of bastions of virtue. I don't think any of us think that anymore about the Windsors. They're basically just very well paid, privileged celebrities. And I just think there's no justification for such a family at all. But I expand a little bit more on my thoughts on Radio Leicester, so you can find that on BBC Sound, should you want to.
Yeah, I mean, just one point in response to that. I mean, there are plenty of constitutional monarchies still in the world, including in your beloved Europe. So it's not something that's totally.
Does it make it right, Chris?
Yeah, but it's not something that is totally alien to the 21st century, is it?
Well, it should be. I mean, that is my point. I mean, I go back to me as a parish councillor. Even if I'd got elected with one vote, that's one vote more than half of Parliament and the head of state. I'm amazed, to be honest, that anyone serious or sensible can defend such an institution. To my mind, it is indefensible. But yeah, so I mean, I guess those are my comments on the royal family more generally, because obviously we can't comment on the specifics. But all I will say is that it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
I was just going to say, I mean, we don't have time to debate the monarchy, I'm sure, given our other, the other points we've got to get to. But look, call me a traditional Tory, but I do believe in the virtues of a balanced constitution, actually. And we mentioned the Irish race. I mean, you only have to look at some of the views that were expressed in that race on issues like Gaza, Israel. I mean, well, there'll be different views. I think I worry slightly about another political layer being introduced. That really bothers me. I think there is something to be said about having some form of institution that tries at least to be above politics.
They are political. They are political, James.
They're not. Tell me one smoking gun, one big issue that Charles has intervened on in British politics that actually people care about beyond fly fishing.
James, I mean, give me a break. I mean, go back and read the Guardian's reporting of his pen letters to ministers where he demanded this,
no one cares.
And the other.
No one cares, because people. I'm afraid I don't think the public really do, because when people look for a smoking gun and have been through Charles's correspondence, people wanted to find him coming in on education. Of course they did, or trying to find something on taxation policy. He does have very strong views on environmental issues, of course he does. And I think, there are some things that he said previously that bristle with me, I'll grant you that. But the area where I think we can meet in the middle is they should not be above scrutiny. Of course they shouldn't.
Absolutely.
And I think that has been something that has been troubling for all of us, and that is exposed by the way Andrew has behaved. And I think, that's why I'm saying the way that everyone deals with this situation now, obviously not casting aspersions on the live case whatsoever, is just vital, because at the heart of this, what have we got? We have got horrific abuses of power. And of course that has to be ironed out, and it would be ironed out in any institution it exists in or need to be.
Well, let's just remember a couple of factual things. Number one, that actually what he was arrested on was the alleged what's the actual phrase? The issues with when he was
misconduct in
public office. Excuse me, when he was the trade envoy from 2001 to 2011. He wasn't arrested on the other stuff. Stuff that was alleged. So we just need to be clear on that, and also, of course, that he denies all allegations, whatever the allegations are. But I just want to make one final point, perhaps on this subject, and again, I made it on the radio this morning, which is that it's interesting that I happen to know I know Graham Smith well, who you often see speaking on behalf of the idea of a republic, because he's the CEO of Republic, the campaign for an elected head of state, and he was he's been on the media a lot today and yesterday, and I remember him telling me when I was on the board of Republic that whenever there was, and this was when there were supposedly happy royal occasions like a wedding or a birth or whatever, that he would see the numbers rise for people who wanted to join Republic. And I think the reason for that is, and I guess in a sense this isn't the royal family's fault, it's the way they're covered, but I don't think they're exactly complaining about it, is that you just get wall-to-wall sycophantic coverage. And you get these royal correspondents and royal commentators who I would allege, who I would argue, seem to lose their journalistic faculties when it comes to the royal family, that they just become extensions of the palace PR department, and it, to be honest, becomes kind of vomit-inducing coverage from outside of hospitals when babies are being born and all the rest. And I think people just get sick of it. And I certainly get sick of it. And so it's always, and actually I was listening to a podcast today, and they were saying that I think it's something like at the moment that a third of the people in polling support a monarchy and a republic, and actually that's grown quite substantially in recent years. And I expect if they did a poll today, it might push closer to half of the country. So, watch this space is what I'd say on that.
Yeah, well, let's see. I think a lot of people would disagree and would have found a lot of romance, for example, in queuing to pay tribute to Her Majesty the Queen after what I think is a far better and dignified career in public service than many politicians I can think of over a long stretch as well. So I completely agree. Let's see what happens with this scandal being salient in the news. But there are I can think of umpteen more political issues that I think the country will be wound up about and that need to be sorted, and that we'll no doubt come on to when we talk about the Prime Minister and his future. But Mathew, I of course respect your views.
I should just say as well, Chris, I should let our viewers and listeners in on the fact that, I think it's only happened once thus far, but I hope we get to do it again soon, that me and James first met when we sparred on, although actually we agreed quite a lot, but when we were on Peter Cardwell's show on Talk TV. So we're used to both agreeing and disagreeing.
It's the name of the game.
Excellent.
Yeah, it is.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure there'll be lots of agreement and disagreement on our next items. And speaking of other issues that are getting people going, let's move on to them. And let's talk about Labour's week, shall we? Another tumultuous week for Labour. You had a whole range of stories. You have, firstly, reports that indicate that the campaign group Labour Together commissioned a PR firm, sort of public affairs firm, to examine the sourcing, funding and origins of a Sunday Times story on undeclared donations. The resulting report included material about journalists' backgrounds that was later criticised as discrediting their work. You have yet another U-turn, the 15th, I think. People are saying the 15th U-turn after the High Court ruled that Labour's attempt to delay 30 council elections was unlawful. The economic picture darkened too, with unemployment rising to 5.2% in the final quarter of 2025, its highest level in years. Although there was a silver lining today with this £30 billion surplus recorded in January. Antonia Romeo was appointed as a new cabinet secretary. We discussed that last week, that this has been confirmed. You had this open letter from former defence secretaries and senior military chiefs criticising Starmer on defence spending. And then you have the whole business with Trump and Chagos. Trump calling the Chagos deal now. I don't know how many U-turns Trump has done on this one, but he's now calling it a big mistake. And it's also emerged that the government has not permitted the United States to use the base at Diego Garcia for potential operations against Iran. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of negative stuff. There have been one or two sort of positive stories, stuff about social media, from the perspective of Labour. But I'm quite surprised that there hasn't been more sort of rumblings, especially since the last couple of weeks. Is it because people are, there's recess and people are away? Is it because the Starmer going is now priced in, so and everybody's now waiting to May? Surely Starmer and Labour can't continue to have weeks like this one. Otherwise, that resignation would be brought nearer, surely, James.
Yeah, well, I think it's worth just 2 points I'd like to make up top. One is, I think, the recess fallacy, right? And let me describe what I mean by the recess fallacy. It's where you assume, because things are quieter in Westminster, the situation faced by a politician is better. So we saw a lot of this over Christmas, right? We saw a lot of coverage over Christmas coming into the new year that the Prime Minister maybe was in a stronger position and he was going to attack January in a real kind of, forward-looking way, get on the front foot. Now, in fairness, Trump, Greenland, all of those issues he could not have seen coming. But you just fast forward, we're not even 2 months on, and, we're now discussing a point where the Prime Minister nearly did go, I think, when you saw Anas Sarwar go over the top, and we're now openly discussing how long has he got left. So my point is, sometimes in Westminster, you can sort of go with a herd or a movement to think, maybe he's safer, and then a week later it's maybe he'll go this week. You've got to look at the fundamentals. So that's my first point. And then the second thing I'd like to say up top is, I do just want to be careful not to be the guy who worked for the last lot saying, look, it's not all that easy, is it? You're making loads of mistakes. Remember, I just described number 10 to you guys and how difficult that building can be and how hard it is to respond to reactive decisions. There are smart people still working in that building around the Prime Minister now who are dealing with hard choices, right? But the problem is, if you don't have an idea of what you are there to do and a plan ready for execution, then the risk is that you do get buffeted by events. And I think that's what we've seen happen. And what we've also seen happen is, and these are political decisions, I think a exhaustion of political capital on questionable things. And the reason why I raise that in response to your question, Chris, is it then brings us on to the U-turns. The reason why the U-turns happen is because you lack confidence, you lack authority because you expended a lot of capital on the winter fuel payment, for example, on the welfare U-turn, on various kind of past decisions last year, which we don't need to relitigate here, that it then means all of a sudden, you don't have the authority anymore with your troops. And that is then coupled, unfortunately for Keir Starmer, with what I think are, very bad poll ratings and perception of him with the public as well. So look, that's the situation we find ourselves in. I do think next week is quite important. Next week you may see some documents released on the Mandelson side, let's see. And then also you have got the by-election on Thursday. And so I think next week is quite important. It was a very difficult week. It's always a very difficult week. And then next week is harder. But let's just see what happens this week and ultimately, where we go from there. And I should say in closing, just because you mentioned something interesting, and Matthew, you'll have views on this. You said, and I think you're right, Chris, about the cabinet and about a resignation. Ultimately, I do think that is the underpriced scenario here. Everyone is focused on when will Angela Rayner or Wes Streeting or someone else move. I was there, I saw Theresa May say I'm going nowhere. I saw Boris Johnson say I'm going nowhere. Ultimately, what does for a British Prime Minister is if and when the cabinet decide that the time is up. And they obviously didn't do that on the day Anas Sarwar went over the top. When do they do that now? Do they do that after May? I don't know. But that is the key, I think, scenario to keep in your mind as a possibility.
Yeah. No, I mean, those are all sort of really good points. I suppose the other thing to add to that is, a lot of these U-turns, especially with the local elections, a lot of this stems also from bad policy. It's like people have been warning Labour that's cancelling elections twice in a row is not going to fly with people and certainly hasn't flied with the courts. Again with Chagos now. I don't know, what Trump's position is with whether Trump's position will force a U-turn over Chagos. It should do. It's, again, another poor policy, which a load of people have been saying is absolutely stupid and mental. So a lot of this is stemmed from a lack of vision and also bad policy. Would you say, Matthew?
I think that's right. If you don't mind, actually, I really wanted to comment on the issue around Labour Together and what's happened with the Sunday Times journalist, one of my favourite political journalists, actually, Gabriel Pogrund, who I just think is an exceptional talent, and quite often I buy the Sunday Times, which isn't my kind of party politics, the Sunday Times, but I quite often buy it to read his latest, and the idea that it's alleged, and again we'll see what happens, but well, I mean, I think actually some of it is fact, but I think some of it is being disputed. So again, it's difficult. But what appears to have happened is that because Labour Together didn't appear to like some of what Gabriel Pogrund and Harry York and others at the Sunday Times and elsewhere were reporting, that they employed an organisation, I think rightly called ACPO, is that right? If I remember correctly, to basically look into these journalists, and now I think it's Josh Simons, the Cabinet Office Minister who was in charge of Labour Together at the time, has said that ACPO went beyond their remit. I think there's some dispute about that. But I think some are alleging that ACPO absolutely stuck to the remit that they had been given. So again, that is a disputed issue that we don't currently know the facts of. But whether it was what they've been asked to do or what they just decided to do of their own accord, this was really not good. And it's actually really worth. I don't often promote other podcasts, but it's really worth catching the current edition of the State of It podcast, which Gabriel Pogrund is interviewed by one of his colleagues at the Times and Sunday Times, and it's a really powerful listen. And he said, I just started getting all of these strange questions about my views and about my faith and about my life and about my political positions, such as they are. And it sounds to me, and again, you have to say allegedly because you have to be careful with these things, but it really sounds like it was an attempted smear job about a journalist who was just doing his job, reporting stories. And it appeared to me pretty damn disgraceful. And I'll just say this, that if, and I stress if this is what a Labour adjacent group, a Keir Starmer supporting group have been up to, then I think that tells us a lot about the Starmer operation. It's very few, I've been around politics and media and all the rest of it for quite a long time. Very few stories make me feel physically sick, but that did. I thought, I don't actually have words to express how disgraceful, if all of it is true, that is. Because the moment I've been a journalist, I've been a politician, and of course it's not nice when you have. Even at kind of council level, I had some stories which weren't exactly wonderfully shining and positive for me, but you just have to live with that, because that is, you have to accept that when you're in elected office, there's scrutiny of you and your decisions, and that's entirely right. But the answer isn't to try and find dirt on the journalists that are doing the reporting. So, I don't think it has. I agree with you, Chris. I don't think that has been reported on anywhere enough thus far, and I hope the rest of the media kind of does its job in saying that this might be a different media organisation to us, but it could have been us, and that this is thoroughly unacceptable. So, really wanted to make that point, Chris.
James.
I was just going to say, well put, Matthew. I actually think, for what it's worth, a lot of Westminster lobby journalists are absolutely going on this story, because it could have been them. They, know Gabriel Pogrund, they know Harry York. So I do think actually it's interesting you concluded that way. I would have said more, I'm not sure if the public are really clocking this story, but actually within Westminster, the press are rightly furious, and so are Labour MPs. And that's the one additional point I'd like to make. Whatever's happened here, whatever the allegations are, whatever the truth, what it risks doing is stirring up factional disputes again within the Labour Party. Because what it will do is it allows if you think about a Rachel Maskell or some of these MPs more on the soft left of the Labour Party who have been stripped of the whip by the Starmer operation in the past for defying them on specific issues, what it does is it allows them to say, well, hang on, that's how the right and the centre of the Labour Party treat people, right? They, allegedly pay for that sort of activity and background on journalists or people they don't like. Well, and they were doing that to people on the left of the party with the aftermath of the Jeremy Corbyn years. It just starts to generate a bit more of a febrile climate again within the Labour Party of, and that is interesting when you're thinking about the possibility of a leadership contest. So that was the only broader point I was going to make in addition to Matthew's summary.
And Chris, if I can just add a couple of more things on this before we move on to other parts of Labour's week, I should just point out that, and again, I hope I've got the guy's name right. This also allegedly this investigation into people writing things that Labour together apparently found disobliging and people adjacent to Keir Starmer may have found disobliging was also Paul Holden, I believe his name is, editor of The Fraud, book about Keir Starmer, and which I've got but I've yet to actually read. But he did a video this week where he talked about, from his perspective, his experience of kind of being looked into, so to speak. So there's that. And also to point out that, and again, Josh Simons has put out his statement of what he believes what happened was. But we've got this weird situation that he's now an MP in a Cabinet Office minister, and in rather typical kind of Keir Starmer way of dealing with things, he supposedly got an independent investigation by the Cabinet Office, ultimately into one of its own ministers. I mean, how on earth does that work?
Yeah, I mean, this is the party that pledged to clean up politics, wasn't it? And in India, I've lost count of how many sort of difficulties, scandals that they've had now, and this is only within the first sort of 18 months or so. So, it just goes to show. It's just again, it's one of these. It's one of these things that Labour says one thing and something else seems to be going on. Before we move on to other parties, perhaps a brief word about sort of Labour and foreign and defence policy. And again, Keir Starmer, even, and I said this last week, even with everything crashing around him, he's still pursuing this Chagos deal, which again is kind of bizarre to keep spending what little political capital he has on this, which is extremely unpopular. But also you have the reports of the government not allowing the US to use their the Diego Garcia as well, which again has created a lot of reaction online, and Yvette Cooper is not denying this. So your reaction to that, James?
Yeah, I mean, on the Chagos deal, I have never seen the political rationale for it, so I'm with you there. But incidentally, I almost see, from an execution perspective, I actually see, you grouped it with the elections, the local elections cancellation earlier. I see that as worse in one way, in that just seems to me as, how did the government muck up that process and not get their legal advice right? And I can tell you now, if we'd done that, Steve Reed, as shadow community secretary, would have been saying, where's your resignation? So I just want to make that point, that we have kind of got to a world now where, a secretary of state or a department making quite a fundamental mistake is almost seen as, no, that's fine, the world will move on. On Chagos and security, I mean, as I say, the rationale is not clear to me. The one thing I would say, again, not to plug a rival news outlet or podcast, guys, but it was quite interesting to see Ben Judah, a former advisor to David Lammy, interviewed by Harry Cole. And I don't agree with it, but it was interesting for the first time to hear a kind of eloquent perspective and background as to how this has been quite a long-running conversation between, if you like, the respective deep states on the US and UK side. So that's just worth paying attention to. But Chris, just one point I'd like to make, just building off your question, because I think the problem for Keir Starmer at the moment is he has two words which he thinks can prolong or save his premiership: stability and security. And the risk to him is that those are kind of in conflict with each other. Because if you emphasise stability, you are basically siding with Rachel Reeves and saying there's no new money, we're keeping the fiscal rules, and if you get rid of me, the markets will go nuts, so I'm your guy. But if you emphasise security, and if we are about to see, you mentioned Iran, if we are about to see a situation escalate in Iran, and you kind of put your hat on, well, don't remove me because I'm the Prime Minister who is there dealing with people on the international stage, the best person able to do that, the obvious running saw is, are we spending enough on defence? And actually, have we sorted out that defence investment plan and where that spending is going, and is it enough? And so those two things, I think, risk being in tension with each other, and that's kind of Keir Starmer's problem at the moment. And then you mentioned it, he's dealing with just a very volatile actor in the form of President Trump. And I think, Trump, fundamentally, his currency is strength and weakness. And, he is not going to be, he's definitely going to be aware of the Prime Minister's current domestic predicament. And I think that's why you are seeing a lot of aggravation or a chance that he sees to kind of turn up the pressure right now, which is difficult for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, it was interesting what you said about defence spending, because we had this bizarre spectacle this week where Keir Starmer at the start of the week said we need to, effectively accelerate defence spending, and then towards the end of the week, Rachel Reeves saying we're not going to do that. Although that's not completely new, because I remember in opposition I used to get requests from David Cameron's office to announce more new policies on defence, and then coming up with ideas and going to George Osborne's office, and they'd say you can't do that, that's too much money, or we're not allowed to make spending commitments. So it's not new, but again it plays to that perception now that no one's really in charge, there's no ideas, no one's making sort of decisions in this government. So your reaction, Mathew, to Labour and foreign affairs this week?
Well, I mean, again, not that I don't want to answer your questions, Chris, but I really want to get on to the local elections thing in a second. But just to answer on Chagos, it's long been my view, and I've said it before on this podcast, that I take the same position that Margaret Thatcher took over the Falklands, which is that the Falkland Islanders wanted to remain British, and I think it's disgraceful that the Chagosians, from what I can tell, I don't pretend to be an expert on these matters because I'm not, but from what I can tell, had very little choice about what happened, what has happened or is set to happen to them, and I just think that's pretty damn illiberal, really. So I'm not a fan of that. But I really want to talk briefly about the U-turn forced on the government on these 30 local elections, which they had planned to cancel and which are now taking place in May, because basically the government accepted the legal advice that it was given, and that it was very likely to be defeated in the court case that Reform UK was set to take on this, because obviously from Reform's, they say that it's all about democracy and all of that, but of course the truth is that Reform expect to win many of these elections, and of course that is why they want the elections to take place. But regardless of that, the elections should be taking place, and I've always said that, and it's a shame that it took, the potential cost of a court case, because I think I'm right in saying, guys, that the government have accepted that they're going to pay the court costs of Reform, even though obviously it hadn't actually got to trial. And of course, what that really means is that the public purse is going to be paying for that. I had a funny thing on. I was on good old GB News very early on Tuesday morning, because they did it because Ed Davey had, in true Ed Davey style, God love my leader, he kind of claimed that this reversal was down to the Liberal Democrats. So I went on air to gamely try and defend that, which was not the easiest of tasks. So that was quite funny. But look, these elections should be taking place. I'm pleased that they now are, but it's left obviously those particular councils rushing to get everything put in place, because elections don't just happen; they have to be organised. And I'm afraid I just think it's yet another. And again, the irony is, and the Daily Tea podcast and others pointed this out this week, that literally a couple of hours after Keir Starmer had said, in a clip in an interview, there will be no more U-turns, was this U-turn. I mean, the man just can't, I don't know. Maybe it's kind of rose tinted glasses. Obviously other governments have had lots of U-turns, of course they have. But there seems to be a particular thing about this Prime Minister and this government, and despite the massive majority, which James quite rightly says that they have, not been able to carry things through. And James is quite right that is because Starmer has lost his authority. And so he may still have the literal majority, but if you don't have the authority to go with that, then you're in a Norman Lamont type situation of being in office but not really in power. And I don't think that is sustainable. Which brings me on to my final point on this, which is that there's lots of speculation at the moment that there's going to be a cabinet reshuffle, that Keir Starmer is going to try yet another reset. And I don't know what number reset we're now on, but I think Starmer is going to try yet another reset, probably after the May elections, if he's not already gone by then. He's going to try and have a reshuffle. But again, what can he really do? I mean, can he really get rid of Rachel Reeves? It's a bit like a Morgan McSweeney situation. They're so tied together. I mean, surely if Rachel Reeves goes, then really Starmer's days are even more numbered than they already are. But there is speculation I've been reading this week that Ed Miliband doesn't actually want to become Prime Minister, but he would really quite like to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So, I mean, will we see, as a kind of last gasp effort by Starmer to cling on, a really dramatic reshuffle where Rachel Reeves goes? Watch this space.
I think that's a great shout, Matthew, because I think she is arguably weaker than Keir Starmer, actually. You could make that case. You could say that a lot of the missteps that have really, or the U-turns that have really hurt the government have been domestic Treasury-led. If we think back to the winter fuel payment, for instance, which I think still does stick in the mind for many people. So I think that's right. I think as well you make a smart political argument that you could see Number 10 thinking in a kind of crisis moment, which is make Ed Chancellor, try and bind in or divide the soft left of the party. But the problem for him is twofold, and you've made these points. But one, you were briefing last year that Number 10 were making economic decisions on the budget, that you were doing it together. So, how can you have plausible distance between yourself and Rachel Reeves if you're the Prime Minister? Political sackings only work if people buy that there is plausible distance or disagreement. And then the second point is, for better or worse, I think Keir Starmer has decided that Rachel Reeves and her fiscal rules is actually key to his survival. It is, in many ways, just being able to say, you get rid of me, look at what markets will do if they fear us moving to the left.
Right.
That, for better or worse, he feels that her strategy is actually core to his survival, notwithstanding some of the political difficulties. So I don't rule it out. By the way, I probably would rule out a broader reshuffle because I'm not sure he's strong enough to make the enemies you would make with various sackings. But I don't rule out a change in the Treasury. It's just very hard to see when and how that plays through to his advantage, to your point.
And James, can I just quickly ask you, when you're in Downing Street and there is a crisis, I mean, what is the atmosphere like? I'm just really interested in, does it feel like there's a crisis? Does it feel like people are running around like headless chickens? Or does work kind of continue as normal, but it's just a heightened sense of this needs to be sorted out?
So if you work in the political team, you set the tone for the building. So you have to try to be calm, but you always know that there's something that might be happening because people run off behind closed doors into side rooms to have conversations. Thing with Number 10, people have said it before, so it's not an original point. Glorious building, quite impractical to work on. So I always used to joke that even though I didn't get much exercise in when I was working in government, my cardio was all right actually, because the policy unit was on the second floor and I'm having to run, up and down the whole time, go and see press colleagues or go around to where the Prime Minister is. So there is that kind of frantic nature. But what you really, really have to try and do, particularly in the political team, is try and set a calm culture in that building. And it's a difficult thing to do. But yeah, you're always watching who's having conversations with whom, what's really going on here.
No, I just say I remember. Obviously, this is not in government, but I remember I was working CCHQ in the 2007 period where Gordon Brown had just come
Yep.
in, and we thought that there was going to be a general election. It was, it was the worst period of my time there. That was there. You just it did. The atmosphere was frenetic. It was, you really did feel that, it was virtually sort of panic stations, and we weren't ready for an election at all. So, so thank God that, thank God that didn't happen.
And it just as well, maybe just end it on a funny note, but it just gets ridiculous as well towards the end. So he won't thank me for using this example, but a good mate of mine and a good former colleague who was my boss, actually, chief of staff to Rishi, Liam Booth-Smith, there was a day where he wore a tie with his suit, right? And you had political picks and X being like, oh, Liam Booth-Smith's in a tie, what's going to happen today? And it just gets towards the those kind of crunch points. You have to try and maintain a sense of humour and camaraderie as well. That's probably a whole different spiel we don't have time for, but you have to try and keep that.
So James, I know I said final question in the last question, but this is the last one on this. I promise you. I mean, Starmer then gone after May?
Oh, I mean, first caveat: who can predict timings or anything with any certainty? There's almost certainly going to be egg on the face. But my view is probably yes, Matthew. Because I just think the Labour Party is going to ask itself one fundamental question. Who is the right person to unite our core vote, take advantage of the split on the right, and keep Nigel Farage out of Downing Street? And I think based on all the information available and the additional information that you will get from the May elections, I think Labour MPs conclude and Cabinet Ministers conclude it can't be Keir Starmer. And I think that's the reason he goes. Who knows, ultimately, someone's going to be wrong, but that, based on everything we know and just a hunch, is what I think.
And speaking of Nigel Farage, let's move on to Reforms Week. And Nigel Farage appointed the first 4 members of his shadow cabinet, top team, whatever you want to call it. So Robert Jenrick is taking the Treasury brief. Zia Youssef gets Home Affairs. Richard Tice is Shadow Deputy Prime Minister, but also will take an integrated business, trade and energy brief. And I think that includes housing as well. And Suella Braverman will be the education spokeswoman. So, Mathew, reaction. Is this like a dream team for you, Mathew?
Well, funny enough, I sat there through gritted teeth because it was on every single flipping news channel the other day when that was happening. I did just think to myself, when would the Lib Dems ever be on all the news channels? So I sat and watched this show, and it is a show. I mean, they put on a show, don't they? They certainly know how to do that. It's not some boring old press conference, but I think some trouble has been stored up for reform by Nigel Farage in his top team, because we all know that several of them wanted to be I'm going to say the Treasury spokesperson, because we don't have shadow chancellors. The Lib Dems tried this a number of years ago, and I thought it made us look foolish then, to be honest with you. And I think this makes reform look foolish now. There's only one set of official shadows, and that is the official opposition, and that is currently the Conservative Party. So I think that side of it is a nonsense. But several people wanted to be the Treasury spokesperson, from what we're led to believe, and ultimately it's gone to Robert Jenrick. And it's interesting that in his first big speech, which was the following day, and again, I have to say, I'm quite impressed by the fact that Reform know how to keep the momentum with them, especially in a week when, and as you say, there was a lot going on with Labour, actually, albeit not a lot of it positive, but Reform know how to have a succession of events, where to have them, when to have them, and to have all of them pretty much covered live on the broadcast media. So in terms of the people behind their operations, although I obviously disagree almost wholeheartedly with what has been said politically, I think the people in terms of the operations do deserve great credit, and I think we Lib Dems, in that sense at least, could actually learn from what they do. But I got the impression that Richard Tice, who's been given the sop of being the deputy prime minister if they get into government, and then has been given this another economic brief. But ultimately, surely it's only the person who becomes the chancellor who is ultimately in charge of economic policy. And then in Zia Youssef, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw his interview on Newsnight, I think, that evening, and by Victoria Derbyshire, who is one of my favourite journalists in the country. I personally wish she did the Sunday morning interviews and not Laura Koonsberg, but there we are. That's just me. But I thought she did a forensic job of just ripping him to shreds, of repeating back to him what he'd said about Robert Jenrick. And apparently there's this new thing in politics, right, which is, oh, well, that was just politics then. What I said then was just politics. No, what I'm saying now is what I really think. What I'm saying now is my real view. Don't worry about what I might have said years ago. Well, we can't have that, can we? I mean, either people are... If they're saying that they've changed their mind, that's a different thing. But don't try and say, oh, well, those were just words. Those were just words I uttered. No, we can't have that.
Matthew, I'm old enough to remember Calamity Clegg. Remember that? Chris Huhne?
I very much remember that, and I wouldn't defend this kind of thing in any political party, including my own. But again, I thought that there's this myth about, I think it's a myth anyway, about Zia Youssef, that he's some wonderful performer and talent. Well, I'm yet to see it, and I thought he wilted like a very wilty flower on that interview. So I mean, I think Nigel Farage is storing up significant potential issues with this new top team. So again, we'll wait and see what happens.
So I hear what Matthew's saying, but one thing I did just want to give a sort of different perspective is, I do think Robert Jenrick's speech this week, from a kind of cities and markets perspective, was quite shrewd. Saying that reform will respect central bank independence, the independence of the OBR, we will do more on planning reform. These are noises which were well received. Now, look, do you believe them? Do you think that Nigel Farage, Robert Jenrick and Zia Youssef, Richard Tice are all going to agree with each other? That's the test. But the one thing I did just want to say is, in terms of a device this week of Robert Jenrick projecting credibility, I think it was quite a smart move, and there's time to go left in the Parliament. Let's see. But I think, that was something else that just kind of stood out to me being in the audience this week.
Okay. Thanks very much, James. This has been really fascinating, and, we really do appreciate you giving your time and giving us the perspective of what's life like in Downing Street. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, guys.
Cheers, James. So, folks, please do all the internet-y things. Please like, please subscribe, please tell your friends. Me and Chris are absolutely delighted that our episode a couple of weeks ago with former Labour advisor Matt Lloyd is our most watched full episode ever on YouTube, with more than 700 views. So we're really, really chuffed about that. The numbers are going in the right direction. So please do all the things. And yeah, thanks once again to James, who I just thought was fantastic, and giving us great insight. And yeah, we'll definitely look to have him on again, Chris.
Oh, definitely. And so do join us next week, Gorton and Denton by-election next week. So we'll be devoting a lot of time to that, and there will be a lot of fallout from that as well. But I hope you have a good week, and we'll see you next time on Political Frenemies.